Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Melody Wilding. Melody is an author, speaker, and executive coach. She's been named as one of Business Insider's most innovative coaches, well-deserved, and has worked with top organizations like Google, Amazon, and JP Morgan. Melody's also been featured in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and you can find her work in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Psychology Today, and Forbes, pretty much anywhere you want to go to get better. And her new book, and it's so good, is Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. And this book comes at the most important time. Melody, I would say welcome, but it's more like welcome back to I Wish They Knew.
I am so honored to be back with you. Yeah, I was on episode 40. So way back when. You've come so far, and just congratulations for the amazing library and platform and community you've built.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that was prehistoric times. But you haven't aged a day since episode 40. Congrats on the book. It's such a timely read and so powerful for people who are looking to navigate these really complicated relationships. And in the book, you lay out 10 conversations to help us get to the place where we want to be. I want to go through some of those conversations with you today.
Of course. And I think what you said is really at the crux of this book. And something I wish I knew earlier in my career is that managing up is not about your boss at all. It's not about sucking up, ingratiating yourself, memorizing their coffee order. That may have worked 20, 30 years ago, but today is really about how are you creating the conditions for your own success?
Yeah. And one of the ways that we do that, and you call this the alignment conversation, is trying to figure out what the manager's unspoken needs are. And that's really our job to figure out, how do we get inside our boss's head without getting on his or her bad side?
The alignment conversation, which you mentioned, it's the first of the 10 conversations in the book for a couple of important reasons. First and foremost, you need to be in alignment with what's on your manager's mind, what their most important priorities are. Because if you're not, you could find yourself working on something to then surface, 3 months later, and your manager says, this isn't at all what we were focusing on or what I wanted. We start there because in a way, it's one of the easier conversations. It's so much about asking great questions and observing and listening for the responses. I think a lot of us think, okay, I'll ask my manager about their priorities, what's on their mind, what's coming up in the next 3 months. That's okay. But usually you're going to get a very surface level response, or sometimes even a dismissive response. If your boss is busy, they haven't had time to give thought to strategic plans and what's coming up. And so asking better questions. One of my favorites is, what are the goals or metrics you talk about with your own boss, and how are those measured? Because that's going to give you pretty instant insight to what your boss is going to care about improving, because that's exactly what their performance has on, their salary, their bonus, and the like.
Yeah, so it sort of cascades down. See what's important to them, and then you'll know what's important to you, or what needs to be important to you.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And also putting constraints around it. So if you say, could you tell me what good performance looks like in the next 3 months? Or if I could wave a magic wand and we flash forward to July, what would you like to say we have accomplished by that point? That makes it so much more concrete. Your manager can almost imagine that in their head, that we're sitting at our, mid-year review, and what do we want to be talking about or sharing with the executive team? That can usually get a more in-depth, more specific response than a vague question.
Yeah, and when your boss sees that you want to be in alignment with him or her, they're more likely to make sure that you're getting what you need to keep that alignment in place.
So you're exactly right that it shows you care. You're engendering trust with your manager because you're showing you're invested in their success, the team's success, but you're also helping yourself because you're preventing problems you may encounter down the road.
One of the hardest parts of managing up is setting those boundaries to hold the line against, the long hours and the unrealistic deadlines and the meeting overload and all the things that managers like to do to other people, not for other people. And I really like the strategy you laid out in the book about creating a boundary inventory. Can you tell us why it's so helpful in setting limits?
When it comes to managing up, there's a couple of buckets we need to pay attention to the most. And the idea is to use your emotions as a signal for where you need to set boundaries, or at least an area you should explore. And the quick rule of thumb is look for areas where you feel an outsized sense of resentment. Because resentment is a very, very strong emotional signal that you've let something go on too long, you feel taken advantage of, basically, that you need to speak up, you need to push back before it burns you out, your work quality gets lower, you're not able to deliver on the deadlines. And so you can really use that as a way to triage the situations and really think about, if I don't tackle this situation in the near term future, how is it going to continue to affect my well being, my productivity, my performance, and job satisfaction? Because you may realize that actually, if I let this go on another 3 months, that's not going to look good. You can also
Yeah.
think about, is this a one time situation or recurring? And how disruptive will my request be? If you're asking your team to change their entire project management system because you're having trouble with it, it's going to be pretty disruptive. But if the boundary or the request is something that's just affecting you, then your manager or the powers that be will be much more amenable to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the conversations you talk about is the feedback conversation, and you had me there, obviously. What I found really interesting, though, is that we spend a lot of time thinking about how to share feedback, but less time thinking about when to share feedback. And one of the things you do in the book is really take us through some of the considerations that we should look at when considering, when to give that feedback to our manager. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah. Somewhat similar to the boundaries, is this a one time occurrence or has this become a pattern? Because if it's a one time occurrence, it may seem a little like you're jumping on the situation if you immediately give feedback on it, and the person may say, well, that was a fluke, or this situation was different. Versus if it's become a pattern, you have much more of a leg to stand on.
Uh-huh.
You also need to think about, what are the consequences if I don't say something? We often only look at the fear around saying something and the potential consequences there to the relationship, our reputation, but we don't think about as much of what's the cost of inaction. And that also, yeah, that can make us realize it's not worth the it's not worth it to me or everybody else. We may lose an account. Um, it may affect the team morale. I had a client recently who was saying, if I don't give this feedback, half of the team is at risk of quitting. So I need to be much more direct with my leader about this. And to that end, before you ever say anything, you have to make sure you have all the facts, because your leaders, your boss, they are under pressures that you cannot see. And so before jumping to conclusions, try to do a little due diligence, or even just mentally reframing for yourself. I'm making this assumption about my boss's behavior, about them being vague or changing priorities every week. What else might be going on? Just put yourself through that mental exercise.
Yeah, so
And
check your assumptions and also do your homework and assess the risks that are involved of not doing something.
yes, and part of that is also, you need to be prepared to be part of the solution, right? And you know this, Joe, you teach this stuff, but it's going to go over so much better if, instead of just dumping an issue on somebody's plate, a complaint on somebody's plate, you offer a suggestion about what you would like to see different. Like, let's say your manager is all over the place in terms of priorities. You may suggest, maybe weekly, we have a level setting meeting, or we create a project brief so we know who the clear owners are for this. And at least that's something you can come to the table with, that your manager can react to and say, yes, no, here's a middle ground. It doesn't just become this amorphous conversation, it actually has more direction to it.
Yeah, if you're going to speak up, you better be ready to step up. So being visible is one of the most important things that we do with and for our bosses. It's part art, it's part smarts. And I'd love for you to help us nail down the balance between showcasing accomplishments without showboating. How do we strike that balance?
You phrased it in a very important way. You said visibility is one of the most important things we do for our boss.
Yes.
And that's important because a
Yes.
lot of people think it is just self promotion and self aggrandizing. And the switch here is to see this more as a core job responsibility, not an extra you do on a day you're feeling particularly bold and courageous. Visibility is about giving your leaders, the people above, across from you, information they need to make informed decisions about project assignments, resources, headcount. Because if they're not aware of all of that, they may not give your team extra budget or greenlight a project that you've been working on for a year because they don't think it's successful. And so it's more about giving people the information that they need. And so that's a
Mm.
fundamental switch because it's less about saying, here's how great I am. And it's more about tying the outcomes that you're achieving, the what to the so what. Here's
Mm.
what I accomplished, but here's why it matters in the bigger picture. Here's how it's advancing our goals, our objectives, our vision. And that's where I think most people go wrong is that they say, okay, I created this report. All right, good for you. Like pat on the back. But what does that mean? What does that enable, facilitate, open up? And that's where visibility really comes in, where you can create more of a narrative about why does this matter in the bigger picture? It's just making the connection between this has been completed and this is why it matters.
Yeah, that's a great approach. Start with individual achievements, but end with team success or collective contribution. That's such an important distinction.
Yeah. And actually, there's a framework I mentioned in that chapter. I call it we, then me. And for that exact reason, so many of us, we don't want to bring visibility to our work because we don't want to seem like we're hogging all of the credit. And so we, then me is about here's what the team accomplished, here's what we did together. And then the me part is here was my individual contribution. So the team launched this great initiative, and it was really a pleasure to be a part of designing the strategy with the board, right? And so you're balancing the collective with the individual.
Yeah, it's a smart way to couch it. So I think one of the hardest conversations that we have with managers, and you talk about this in the book also, isn't about money, although that's hard. It's about growth.
Mm.
What do you do if you want to advance, you want to develop, you want to continue to grow, but it becomes clear to you that your manager just isn't interested in affording you with those kinds of growth opportunities? How do you have that conversation?
A couple things. Another frame shift I offer in this book is that managing up is not just about your boss. I think we've been told that managing up is something you do when you have a difficult manager, and that's also false. It's something you should do as proactive career hygiene.
Mm.
And also that, yes, your boss is your number one customer, but especially today, they can't be your only customer. And that matters here because I have had plenty of clients, for whatever reason, their boss was biased against them or limiting them, or their boss just didn't have influence and sway to grant them the types of opportunities that they wanted. And so you have to diversify who your advocates are. You need other allies besides your boss. And putting that aside, you also need to think about more creative ways to think about advancement because we need to understand the limitations our leaders may be under. They may only have a limited amount of promotions or level changes that they can give in a given year. And once that's done, that's done. Their hands are tied. And so thinking more creatively about what advancement could look like for you. Is it increasing headcount? Is it taking on some sort of stretch project or learning a new skill or whatever it is? All of those are forms of advancement that your boss may be more likely and able to grant. And I am a huge fan of planting seeds throughout the year. Number one, a lot of people fall into the performance review paradox, which they think like that is the time. That is the time to bring up, here are my plans and here's what I want for the future. Often that's too late. The plans have already been made. And again, your manager's hands are tied. And so early on in the process, you need to be seeding some of your interests. So let's say you accomplish some big project. that's your time to say, it was really great getting to interact with this other team. I would love more opportunities to do that sort of cross-functional work. Do you see anything like that coming down the pike? And so you start to feel out what opportunities might be here. You start to get objections about, oh, we'll see, I'm not sure if my boss is going to go for that. That allows you to be more strategic over time rather than sort of making all these plans behind the scenes and doing all of this effort. And then you get to a point and your manager says, no, we can't do that for whatever reason. So planting those seeds is really important. And also trying to understand. One of my favorite phrases is help me understand. You can say, my performance reviews have been positive. I've exceeded expectations for the last 2 years. So help me understand what is standing in the way, and good information about the constraints your manager has. You may also help put them on the spot around if they are not promoting you for whatever reason, then you have more of a case to say, all right, it doesn't sound like the criteria are very clear here. Could we work on more of a tactical plan and agree to that so I can work against that?
The book is Managing Up, and the author, and I think she's up there, is Melody Wilding. Melody, thanks for sharing your wish with us today.
So great to be back with you. Thank you.